It rained the morning his father was buried. The kind of rain that made everything feel heavier, like the world knew something was missing. Ethan stood silently beside the open grave, the black wool of his coat soaked through, but he didn't care. He hadn't cried. Not when the phone call came, not when he flew back from New York, and not even now. People whispered behind umbrellas. The priest's voice echoed under the sky, but Ethan heard none of it. Just the rain. Just the sound of water hitting the dirt and the casket going down. 10 years. That's how long it had been since they last spoke. 10 years since Ethan slammed the door and left home, swearing he'd never come back. Now, there he was, back in that same town, by the same church, standing over the grave of the man who once tucked him in at night, and later became a stranger. He wondered if it should have felt like closure, but it didn't. There was no anger left, no forgiveness either, only a quiet emptiness that echoed deeper than words. The rain had softened to a drizzle when the crowd began to thin. Ethan stood near the grave, unmoving, his shoes sinking slightly into the wet earth. From behind him, the sound of footsteps approached, a slow, deliberate rhythm against the muddy ground. "A letter," said a voice, aged and gentle. It was his Aunt Margaret, his father's older sister. She held out an envelope with both hands, as if it weighed more than just paper. Her eyes glanced down for a moment before meeting his. "He wrote it last week, said he wanted you to have it." Ethan stared at the envelope. It was yellowed at the edges, handwritten in the kind of neat script his father always used, formal and slightly rigid. It had his name on the front, Ethan. He didn't take it right away. His hands stayed in his coat pockets as if the gesture of reaching out would mean admitting he cared. But Aunt Margaret didn't force it. She simply placed the envelope on the small stone bench nearby and gave him a nod before walking away through the soft rain. Ethan waited until her figure disappeared down the cemetery path. Only then did he sit on the bench and pick up the letter, holding it like a fragile thing, something ancient and alive. He didn't open it, not yet, just stared at the familiar handwriting, letting the silence build around him. The memory came suddenly, uninvited, like a ghost walking through an open door. Ethan was 18. He remembered the kitchen, dimly lit, the sound of rain on the windows, and the thunder in his chest as he shouted at his father. They had fought before, but never like this. This one had weight to it, like it was about everything they never said before. "You never listened," Ethan had said, voice shaking. "You only saw what you wanted to see." His father stood across the room, fists clenched, trying to stay calm. "I wanted to protect you. You wanted to control me." That was the moment the wall between them cracked completely. Not from the yelling, but from what came after. Silence, heavy and sharp, like broken glass between them. Ethan had left that night with only a backpack, his college acceptance letter, and enough anger to burn bridges without looking back. For years he told himself he didn't regret it. But now, sitting on a bench with the unopened letter in his hand, the memory stung like it had just happened. Time had done nothing to dull it. He stared at the grave, lips pressed tight, Maybe they were both wrong. Maybe that didn't matter anymore. The letter sat on the coffee table, like it didn't belong there. Ethan had dropped it carelessly after the funeral, and now it stared back at him like it was waiting to be read. The apartment was quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional tap of rain on the windows. He hadn't moved for hours. Slouched on the couch, still in his funeral clothes, Ethan's fingers traced the edge of the envelope, but never opened it. His thumb paused at his name. His father's handwriting, still so exact, so unchanging, even after all these years. He leaned back and closed his eyes. For a moment, he thought about just burning it, throwing it out, pretending it never existed. But something in him stopped that impulse. Something he couldn't name. He opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling, his jaw tightening. Why now? Why after so long? He stood, paced the room twice, and returned to the couch. The envelope remained untouched. The struggle wasn't about the paper. It was about what might be inside. A confession? An apology? Or just empty words? He was afraid it would hurt more to open it than to leave it sealed. It wasn't the sound that brought the memory. It was the smell. Rain on concrete, damp fabric, and old wood. The scent of his childhood front porch after a storm. Ethan wasn't sure when the memory slipped in, but suddenly, he wasn't in his apartment anymore. He was 12 again, sitting on the porch steps beside his father as the rain fell steadily around them. It was quiet, but not uncomfortable. His father had just finished fixing Ethan's bike. One of the pedals had come loose again, and Ethan remembered watching the way his father's hands worked, strong and sure, then wiped clean with an old cloth he always carried in his back pocket. They didn't talk much, but Ethan had felt safe. The kind of safety that didn't need words. That afternoon, the sky had turned pink behind the clouds, and his father had said something simple, something Ethan hadn't thought about in years. You know, sometimes fixing things takes time, but it's worth it. It meant nothing then, but now it hit like thunder. Ethan blinked, pulled from the memory by the sudden silence in the room. The hum of the fridge had stopped. The city outside was still. His hands were back on the envelope without realizing it. He wasn't sure if he was ready, but the memory had cracked something open. That night, Ethan finally fell asleep, though he hadn't meant to. The letter was still unopened, lying on the table beside him. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the air remained heavy. In his sleep, he dreamed of the house he grew up in. It was strange, familiar, but not quite right. The hallway was longer, the rooms more shadowed. He walked barefoot on creaking floors, drawn toward a flickering light at the end of the corridor. He knew it before he saw it. His father's study. He pushed open the door. The room was warm, golden. A desk lamp lit a stack of letters, all unopened. His father sat behind the desk, younger than Ethan remembered him. He didn't look up. He just kept writing. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He stepped forward, reaching out to touch one of the letters, but his father stopped him. Not with words, but with a glance. Then he finally spoke. "You'll read it when you're ready." Ethan woke up with a gasp, heart pounding. Morning light crept in through the window. He sat up, blinking. The envelope was still there, still sealed. But for the first time, it didn't feel like it was waiting to hurt him. The morning light was thin and pale, stretching across the apartment floor like a whisper. Ethan sat at the table, hands resting on the envelope as if it might disappear. His coffee had gone cold. The quiet was sharp, but he didn't reach for music. No distractions. Just the letter. He turned it over once, then again. The back was sealed with a worn strip of glue, edges slightly curled. His name was still there, in his father's unmistakable handwriting. Finally, he pulled a letter opener from the drawer. The paper inside was a single page, folded neatly. It was old, the creases crisp, the ink slightly faded. He unfolded it slowly, eyes scanning the first few words. Ethan, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. He stopped, breath caught. For a second, he considered closing it, but he didn't. I know we never talked the way we should have. I failed at that. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was fear. I don't know anymore. There was no dramatic confession, no secrets, just a father trying, even if it was too late. You were always braver than me, smarter. I hope you're finding your way. I wish I'd said that to your face. The last lines were short, honest, unfinished. I'm sorry for how I hurt you. I'm proud of who you are. Ethan's eyes lingered on the ink, unmoving. There were no tears, just a quiet ache he didn't know how to carry. The phone sat beside the letter like it belonged there now. Ethan stared at it for a long time, thumb hovering above the screen. His contact list was short. He didn't talk to many people these days. But one name stood out, Margaret. He hadn't spoken to his aunt since the funeral. There had been nothing left to say. But now, after reading the letter, there was too much. He didn't know where to start. He pressed the name. The ring was short. She answered quickly, like she had been expecting him. Ethan? He froze. Her voice was the same, calm, a little raspy from age, but warm. Hi, he said, his throat dry. I read it. There was a pause. Then, I'm glad. He didn't know what he wanted from this call. Maybe just to feel less alone. Maybe to ask questions he wasn't ready to voice. But she filled the silence like only someone who knew the whole story could. He wanted to say more, she said softly. He didn't know how. Ethan looked at the window. The rain had returned. He was proud of you, she added. You should know that. I didn't think I needed to hear that, he said quietly. But I think I did. The phone call lingered in Ethan's head, like a soft echo. He stood in the hallway now, in front of the closet he rarely opened. It was small, used mostly for things he didn't want to think about. Old coats, empty boxes, winter shoes. He opened the door slowly. A puff of stale air met him. Tucked in the back corner, beneath a faded duffel bag, was a cardboard box. He didn't recognize it. No labels, just a plain lid and dust gathered along the seams. He crouched, pulled it forward, and opened it. Inside were a few photographs, a worn journal, a birthday card he hadn't seen in years. Then, a folded letter, different from the one he had just read. This one wasn't addressed to him. It was addressed from him. Ethan froze. He unfolded it with trembling hands. The paper was rough, the ink smeared in places. His own handwriting. It was dated the week he left home. It was a letter he'd written, but never sent. He read it aloud under his breath, his voice shaky. It wasn't angry. It was scared. It was confused. A boy trying to explain why he had to leave and how much he wished things were different. And at the bottom, scrawled almost as an afterthought, "I still love you, Dad." The morning passed slowly, as if the world had softened around him. Ethan sat at his desk now, both letters in front of him, the one from his father and the one he had written as a boy. Side by side, they looked like bookends to a story neither had finished. He read them again. The words felt different this time. He didn't just see pain, he saw attempts, reaches, broken bridges trying to rebuild from opposite ends. He took a breath, reached for a pen, and began to write. There were no grand sentences, no dramatic phrases, just the truth. He didn't write to the past, or the father he had resented. He wrote to the memory, to the silence between them, to the boy he was and the man he had become. When he finished, he folded the letter and placed it in the same box. Not to be sent, not to be shared, just to be known. He stood and walked to the window. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds parted gently, and golden lights spilled across the city. For the first time in years, the quiet no longer felt heavy. He closed his eyes. Forgiveness hadn't arrived like a thunderclap. It had come slowly, quietly, like light creeping in through a door that had been closed too long. And in that moment, Ethan allowed himself to feel it. Thank you for watching this story until the very end. Some letters are never opened in time, but their meaning lives on, quietly, deeply. If this story touched something in you, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt stories like this one. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next story.